I walked into the 42nd floor conference room that Tuesday morning, knowing this would be the most crucial meeting in our company's 15-year history. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of downtown Seattle. But my attention was focused on the mahogany table where our biggest clients were already seated. Representatives from Microsoft, Amazon, and Boeing filled the leather chairs. Their combined contracts worth over $200 million annually. These weren't just clients. They were the foundation upon which our entire consulting firm was built. As Senior Vice President of Operations, I had spent the last 6 months preparing for this presentation. We were pitching a revolutionary new AI platform that could transform how these tech giants manage their supply chains. The research had taken 2 years, the development another 18 months, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. If we landed these contracts, Hays Consulting would become one of the most valuable firms on the West Coast. If we failed, we'd likely be forced to sell to a competitor within the year. CEO Jonathan Hays stood at the head of the table in his signature navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his smile radiating the confidence that had made him a billionaire by age 50. He had built this company from nothing, starting in a garage 20 years ago and growing it into a powerhouse that employed over 3,000 people worldwide. His reputation for identifying talent and making bold decisions was legendary in business circles. The other executives filled their seats with the nervous energy that accompanies high-stakes meetings. Marketing Director Sarah Chen shuffled through her presentation materials one final time. CFO Robert Martinez reviewed financial projections on his tablet. Head of Development Dr. Lisa Patel checked her technical demonstrations. We were as prepared as we could possibly be, but something felt different about today's energy. Before we could begin the client presentation, Jonathan Hays cleared his throat and made an announcement that stunned everyone in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed with today's business, I want to share some exciting news about our company's leadership structure. His voice carried the theatrical quality he used for major pronouncements, and I felt my stomach tighten with anticipation. The clients looked up with polite interest, expecting perhaps news of a new partnership or acquisition. The employees around the table exchanged quick glances, wondering what surprise our CEO had in store. None of us were prepared for what came next. I'm pleased to announce that Marcus Rivera will be joining our executive team as the new Director of Strategic Innovation. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus Rivera was a 24-year-old intern who had been with the company for exactly 8 months. He had no relevant experience, no advanced degree, and, frankly, no apparent qualifications for any leadership position, let alone one at the executive level. I watched as confusion spread across the faces of our clients. These were seasoned business leaders who understood organizational hierarchies and the typical progression of careers in consulting. The idea that an intern could leap directly to a director-level position was not just unusual, it was virtually unheard of in serious business environments. Sarah Chen's presentation materials slipped from her hands and scattered across the floor. Dr. Patel's mouth hung open in obvious shock. Robert Martinez looked like he had been punched in the stomach. Around the table, 20 years of combined executive experience was struggling to process what they had just heard. Marcus Rivera himself sat in the corner of the room with a smug expression that suggested he was thoroughly enjoying the shocked reactions. He was dressed in an expensive suit that looked brand new, his hair styled differently than I had ever seen it, and his posture conveyed a confidence that seemed wildly disproportionate to his actual accomplishments or capabilities. What made this announcement particularly galling was what I knew about Marcus Rivera's actual performance during his internship. As the executive who oversaw the intern program, I had direct access to his evaluations, project contributions, and feedback from supervisors. The picture painted by this data was not flattering. Marcus had missed more days of work than any other intern in company history, consistently arriving late when he did show up and leaving early whenever possible. His project assignments were routinely submitted past deadline, if they were submitted at all. When he did complete work, it was typically substandard and required extensive revision by full-time staff members. I had received complaints about his attitude from multiple department heads. He was dismissive of feedback, argumentative with supervisors, and seemed to believe that the normal rules and expectations didn't apply to him. His technical skills were mediocre at best, and his understanding of our industry was superficial, despite 8 months of supposedly intensive training. Most damaging of all, Marcus had been caught multiple times using company resources for personal projects, including developing a competing business plan during work hours. When confronted about this clear violation of company policy, he had shown no remorse and actually argued that his entrepreneurial spirit should be viewed as an asset rather than a liability. The contrast between this reality and Jonathan Hayes's glowing introduction of our new Director of Strategic Innovation was so stark that I wondered if we were talking about the same person. Looking around the room, I could see that other executives were having similar thoughts. Dr. Patel had worked directly with Marcus on 2 projects and had privately told me that his contributions were essentially worthless. Sarah Chen had complained to HR about his inappropriate comments during marketing meetings. Even Robert Martinez, who rarely criticized anyone publicly, had questioned Marcus's work ethic during our monthly executive reviews. The representatives from our major clients were clearly struggling to understand what they had just witnessed. James Patterson from Microsoft, a man known for his diplomatic approach to business relationships, shifted uncomfortably in his chair and exchanged meaningful glances with his colleagues. Rebecca Thompson from Amazon, whose reputation for direct communication was legendary, looked like she was fighting the urge to ask pointed questions about this surprising personnel decision. David Kim from Boeing simply stared at Marcus Rivera with an expression that suggested he was trying to solve a complex mathematical equation that didn't add up. These clients had worked with our company for years and understood our culture, our standards, and our typical approach to talent development. They knew the caliber of professionals we typically promoted to leadership positions, individuals with advanced degrees, years of relevant experience, and proven track records of success. Marcus Rivera fit none of these criteria, and their confusion was palpable. I could see them beginning to question not just this specific decision, but our company's judgment more broadly. If we were willing to promote someone so obviously unqualified to a director-level position, what did that say about our other business decisions? How could they trust us to manage their multi-million-dollar contracts if we couldn't properly evaluate our own employees? Jonathan Hayes seemed oblivious to the room's discomfort, continuing to praise Marcus's innovative thinking and fresh perspective. He spoke about the need for companies to disrupt traditional hierarchies and embrace unconventional talent. But his words sounded increasingly hollow as he attempted to justify what appeared to be an indefensible decision. Marcus Rivera basked in the attention, occasionally nodding as if to confirm the CEO's assessment of his exceptional abilities. His smirk suggested he was enjoying the discomfort of the senior staff, who had criticized his performance throughout his internship. This was clearly his moment of vindication, his proof that the established order was wrong about his potential. As Jonathan Hayes continued his effusive praise of Marcus Rivera's non-existent accomplishments, I felt something building inside me that I had never experienced in 15 years of corporate life. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound sense of injustice that threatened to overwhelm my professional composure. I watched colleagues who had dedicated decades to this company, who had sacrificed family time and personal goals to build something meaningful, sitting in stunned silence as their CEO elevated someone who had contributed nothing of value. Dr. Patel had worked 18-hour days for 2 years developing the AI platform we were presenting today. Sarah Chen had rebuilt our entire marketing strategy from scratch, increasing our client base by 300%. Robert Martinez had navigated us through the 2020 economic crisis, keeping every employee on payroll when other companies were conducting mass layoffs. These were the people who deserved recognition and advancement, not some connected intern who couldn't be bothered to show up on time. The injustice was compounded by what I suspected but couldn't prove, that Marcus Rivera's sudden elevation had nothing to do with merit and everything to do with connections. His last name had seemed familiar when he first joined the company, and I had eventually discovered that his father was Rodriguez Rivera, a major investor in several of Jonathan Hayes's business ventures. The pieces of this puzzle were beginning to form a picture that made my stomach turn. Rebecca Thompson from Amazon finally broke the awkward silence. "Mr. Hayes, could you elaborate on Mr. Rivera's specific qualifications for this position? I'm not familiar with his background or previous experience." Her question was politely phrased, but carried an undertone that suggested she was as confused as everyone else in the room. Jonathan Hayes's response was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak, filled with buzzwords about disruption and innovation, but devoid of any concrete examples of Marcus's actual accomplishments or qualifications. Block 6. The Moment of Truth. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point when James Patterson from Microsoft asked the question that changed everything. "Mr. Hayes, in our 15-year partnership with your company, we've always valued your commitment to excellence and meritocracy. Could you help us understand how this promotion aligns with those values?" His tone was respectful, but firm. The voice of someone who represented hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue and expected straight answers to reasonable questions. Jonathan Hayes's face flushed slightly, a tell I had learned to recognize during my years working with him. He was about to say something he would regret, but his ego wouldn't allow him to admit that this promotion might have been a mistake. "Mr. Patterson, I think you'll find that true innovation comes from thinking outside traditional paradigms. Marcus represents the future of business leadership, young, dynamic, unencumbered by outdated assumptions about how things should be done." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything in its path. I could see the exact moment when our clients realized that their concerns were being dismissed rather than addressed. These were serious business leaders who had built their careers on data, performance metrics, and results. They weren't interested in philosophical discussions about paradigm shifts. They wanted to know why someone with no qualifications was being placed in a position of authority over projects that affected their companies. David Kim from Boeing leaned forward in his chair. "Mr. Hayes, with respect, we're talking about a director-level position with significant responsibility for strategic initiatives. What specific achievements or experiences qualify Mr. Rivera for this role?" It was a fair question that deserved a factual answer. Instead, Jonathan Hayes continued his evasive rhetoric about innovation and fresh perspectives. Marcus Rivera sat smugly beside him, clearly enjoying the spectacle of powerful executives being forced to accept his elevation regardless of their concerns or objections. That's when I realized I had reached my limit. Block 7. Breaking my silence. I stood up from my chair with a deliberate movement that drew every eye in the room to me. The weight of what I was about to do settled on my shoulders like a heavy coat, but I felt a clarity of purpose that surprised me with its intensity. 15 years of watching incompetence rewarded while excellence was taken for granted had led to this moment. Looking directly at our clients, I spoke with a calmness that belied the storm raging inside me. "I think our clients deserve to know the truth about Marcus Rivera's qualifications and performance during his internship with our company. The silence that followed my statement was absolute. Jonathan Hayes's face went from flushed to pale as he realized what was about to happen. Marcus Rivera's smug expression faltered for the first time all morning. The other executives around the table looked like they had stopped breathing, unsure whether to admire my courage or mourn my career suicide. Our clients, however, leaned forward with obvious interest. These were people who had built successful careers by gathering accurate information and making decisions based on facts rather than spin. They clearly wanted to hear what I had to say, regardless of the political implications for our company's leadership. In 8 months as an intern, I continued, Marcus Rivera has missed more days of work than any other intern in company history. He consistently arrives late, leaves early, and submits substandard work past deadline. He has been caught using company resources for personal projects and has shown a complete disregard for feedback from supervisors. The factual, measured tone of my statement seemed to amplify its impact. I wasn't making emotional accusations or personal attacks. I was simply sharing documented information about performance and behavior. Jonathan Hayes tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand and continued. More importantly, our clients should know that Marcus Rivera's father, Rodriguez Rivera, is a major investor in Mr. Hayes's personal business ventures outside this company. Block 8. The Explosive Revelation. The impact of my words was immediate and devastating. Rebecca Thompson from Amazon sat back in her chair as if physically struck by the information. James Patterson from Microsoft began taking notes with the focused intensity of someone documenting evidence. David Kim from Boeing simply stared at Jonathan Hayes with an expression that had shifted from confusion to something approaching disgust. The room's atmosphere had transformed from uncomfortable tension to barely contained outrage. These clients had trusted our company with hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts based on our reputation for integrity and merit-based decision-making. The revelation that nepotism and personal financial relationships were influencing executive appointments struck at the foundation of that trust. Jonathan Hayes's face had gone through several color changes and settled on a dangerous shade of red. "That's enough," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "This is highly inappropriate and completely out of line." But the damage was already done, and everyone in the room knew it. Marcus Rivera looked like he wanted to disappear into his expensive suit. The revelation about his father's business relationship with the CEO had exposed the true nature of his promotion in a way that no amount of corporate spin could disguise. Dr. Patel, Sarah Chen, and Robert Martinez were staring at me with expressions that mixed admiration with terror. They knew I had just ended my career at Hayes Consulting, but they also knew that someone had finally said what they were all thinking. The other executives around the table were frozen, unsure whether to support their colleague who had spoken truth to power or distance themselves from someone who had just committed professional suicide. Rebecca Thompson was the first client to speak. "Mr. Hayes, is what we just heard accurate? Is there a financial relationship between your personal business interests and Mr. Rivera's family?" Her question cut through the corporate politeness like a knife, demanding a direct answer to a direct question. Block 9. The unraveling Jonathan Hayes attempted damage control, but his usual charisma had abandoned him completely. "The personal investments you're referring to are completely separate from company operations and have no bearing on personnel decisions." His denial sounded hollow even to his own ears, and the clients were clearly not convinced. James Patterson from Microsoft closed his laptop with a decisive snap. "Mr. Hayes, I think we need to postpone this meeting until we can better understand the governance structure and decision-making processes at your company." The polite language couldn't disguise what was really happening. Our biggest client was expressing serious doubts about continuing their business relationship with us. David Kim from Boeing was already gathering his materials. I agree. Boeing takes corporate governance very seriously, and we need to review our partnership in light of these revelations. These weren't idle threats or negotiating tactics. These were major corporations protecting their own reputations by distancing themselves from what they perceived as corruption and nepotism. Marcus Rivera finally found his voice, attempting to defend his promotion with a string of unconvincing arguments about his contributions and potential. But his words only made the situation worse, highlighting the vast gap between his actual accomplishments and the position he had been given. Dr. Patel, emboldened by my example, spoke up for the first time. I worked directly with Marcus on 2 major projects. His contributions were minimal, and his technical understanding was insufficient for the tasks assigned to him. Sarah Chen nodded in agreement. I can confirm that assessment. We've had to redo most of his work to meet our quality standards. Robert Martinez, ever the diplomat, tried to find middle ground. Perhaps we should focus on the client presentation and address personnel matters privately. But the clients were no longer interested in presentations or business discussions. The revelation about nepotism had fundamentally altered their perception of our company's integrity. Block 10. The aftermath begins. As our clients began filing out of the conference room, making polite excuses about scheduling conflicts and the need to reassess their strategies, the full magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. 15 years of relationship building, millions of dollars in revenue, and the company's entire future had been jeopardized by a nepotistic promotion and my decision to expose it. Jonathan Hayes stood at the head of the table, his earlier confidence replaced by barely contained rage. Marcus Rivera looked like he was fighting the urge to run from the room, his moment of triumph having transformed into a public humiliation. The other executives sat in stunned silence, unsure how to process the sudden collapse of the most important meeting in company history. Rebecca Thompson paused at the door and turned back to address the room. Mr. Hayes, Amazon values transparency and merit-based leadership in our partnerships. Until we can better understand your company's governance practices, we'll be suspending our current contracts and reconsidering our future relationship. Her statement was delivered with professional courtesy, but its implications were catastrophic. Amazon represented 40% of our annual revenue, and losing them would trigger a cascade of financial problems that could destroy the company within months. After the clients left, the conference room felt like a tomb. The mahogany table that had hosted so many successful negotiations and celebrations now seemed like a monument to failure and betrayal. The city view that usually inspired confidence and ambition looked cold and unforgiving through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Jonathan Hayes finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. Congratulations, you've just destroyed everything we've built here. I hope you're satisfied with your moment of moral superiority. His words were meant to wound, but I felt surprisingly calm. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I had acted according to my principles rather than my fears. The consequences would be severe, but I could live with them in a way I couldn't have lived with continued silence. Block 11. Standing by the truth. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything I had experienced in my corporate career. Jonathan Hayes unleashed 15 years of accumulated frustration and anger. Not just at me, but at anyone who had ever questioned his decisions or challenged his authority. He accused me of jealousy, disloyalty, and professional sabotage. He questioned my judgment, my motives, and my character. Marcus Rivera joined in, claiming that my criticism was based on personal bias rather than objective assessment of his performance. But something remarkable happened as they attacked me. The other executives began to find their voices. Dr. Patel quietly confirmed that my assessment of Marcus's technical abilities was accurate. Sarah Chen provided specific examples of his poor performance and unprofessional behavior. Even Robert Martinez, typically cautious about controversial statements, acknowledged that the promotion had raised questions about our merit-based culture. It became clear that I wasn't the only one who had been troubled by what we had witnessed. I was simply the only one who had been willing to speak publicly about it. The courage to tell the truth, even when it carried personal costs, seemed to inspire others to examine their own silence and complicity. Jonathan Hayes grew increasingly isolated as more details about Marcus's poor performance emerged. The picture painted by multiple executives was consistent and damning. An underqualified intern had been elevated to a director-level position based on family connections rather than merit. His attempts to defend the decision became increasingly desperate and unconvincing. As the meeting finally broke up, I was approached by several colleagues who thanked me privately for saying what they hadn't been brave enough to voice. Dr. Patel told me that she had been considering leaving the company because she was tired of watching incompetence rewarded while hard work was taken for granted. Sarah Chen admitted that she had lost respect for leadership over the past year, but hadn't known how to address her concerns constructively. Block 12. The company crumbles. Over the following weeks, the consequences of that boardroom confrontation rippled through every aspect of Hayes Consulting's operations. Within 48 hours, all three major clients had formally suspended their contracts, pending a review of our corporate governance practices. The financial impact was immediate and devastating. Cash flow problems forced us to implement hiring freezes, cancel projects, and begin laying off employees. The story of Marcus Rivera's promotion and my explosive revelation leaked to industry publications and social media, becoming a case study in corporate nepotism and the importance of whistleblowing. Business schools began using our company as an example of how personal relationships and family connections could compromise organizational integrity. Jonathan Hayes hired a crisis management firm and attempted to control the narrative, but the damage was irreversible. Too many people had witnessed the truth, and our clients' reactions spoke louder than any public relations campaign. Marcus Rivera quietly resigned from his director position and left the company entirely, though not before attempting to blame me for his public humiliation. Several board members called for Jonathan Hayes' resignation, questioning not just this specific decision, but his overall judgment and leadership style. The man who had built the company from nothing was suddenly fighting for his professional survival, facing scrutiny from investors, clients, and employees. As for me, I was terminated 2 weeks after the meeting, officially for failure to follow proper channels for addressing personnel concerns. The termination was clearly retaliatory, but I had expected it and made peace with the consequences of my decision. Within a month, I had received job offers from 3 competing firms whose leaders had heard about my willingness to prioritize integrity over job security. The job market for senior executives with proven ethical standards was surprisingly robust, and companies valued leaders who would tell difficult truths even when it was personally costly. Dr. Patel, Sarah Chen, and several other talented executives also left the company, citing concerns about leadership and culture. Brain drain accelerated the company's decline as clients realized that the people who had actually delivered value were abandoning ship. Block 13. Vindication and Reflection. 6 months after that fateful Tuesday morning, Hayes Consulting was acquired by a larger firm at a fraction of its previous value. The acquisition was structured primarily to gain access to our client contracts and intellectual property, with most of the existing leadership team being replaced immediately. Jonathan Hayes walked away with a significant payout, but a permanently damaged reputation in business circles. The consulting industry is small and interconnected, and stories about his nepotistic decision-making and explosive reaction to criticism followed him to every new opportunity. Marcus Rivera's brief career in consulting ended with that promotion, and he eventually returned to school to pursue an MBA, though his association with the Hayes consulting scandal continued to follow him. Several of my former colleagues reached out to thank me for speaking up when they couldn't find the courage to do so themselves. Dr. Patel joined the same firm where I had landed, and we collaborated on several successful projects that restored our faith in merit-based organizations. Sarah Chen started her own marketing consultancy and has built it into a thriving business based on transparency and authentic communication. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the importance of speaking truth to power, even when the personal costs are high. Organizations that suppress honest feedback and reward connections over competence are ultimately unsustainable, but change only happens when someone is willing to break the silence. The clients who walked out of that conference room later told me privately that they had been waiting for someone inside the company to confirm what they suspected about our